Some Italian generals mocked the Allied plan until the beachhead exploded into one of World War II's bloodiest turning points. They didn't believe the Allies would risk everything on a move this bold. They didn't believe the landing could be pulled off. And they certainly didn't believe it would hit them exactly where they felt safest, right behind their strongest defensive line. But that disbelief turned into panic the moment Allied troops stepped onto the sand at Anzio. A landing so silent, so precise, and so unexpected that the Italian and German commands were briefly paralyzed. What followed was a chain reaction that none of them could control. The Italian campaign had already been brutal. The Germans weren't giving up an inch unless the Allies ripped it from their hands. And while Italy had already surrendered months earlier, German troops didn't just occupy the peninsula. They locked it down behind some of the toughest defensive lines of the entire war. The Gustav Line, anchored by the mountain fortress of Monte Cassino, had already stopped the Allied advance cold. Reaching Rome felt like trying to march through a brick wall. But what if you didn't go through the wall? What if you simply went around it? That idea came straight from Winston Churchill. He wanted a blow so unexpected it would shock the Germans into pulling troops away from the Gustav Line. A strike deep behind their positions. A landing so close to Rome that it would force them to panic and retreat, leaving the defensive line open for Allied forces to push through. The plan became Operation Shingle, and from the very beginning, everyone knew it was a gamble. Not because the landing itself was impossible, but because holding the beachhead afterward would put thousands of soldiers in a deadly pocket, unless reinforcements broke through from the south. Even before the first ship left port, the joke started behind closed doors. Some Italian officers who had collaborated with the Germans mocked the idea outright, calling it reckless and doomed. They assumed the Allies had neither the nerve nor the strength to land behind enemy lines. Even some German officers were convinced the entire operation was a bluff, but their overconfidence blinded them to the speed and precision the Allies were about to unleash. The landing began under a moonlit sky on January 22, 1944. The sea was calm, the wind barely moved, and for a moment the coast near Anzio was so quiet it felt abandoned. The first Allied vessels moved through the darkness like shadows. No one fired, no alarms sounded, not a single German artillery piece woke up to challenge them. The silence was surreal, and within minutes Allied troops were stepping onto the shore, expecting chaos, but finding nothing. They had achieved total surprise. It was the kind of start commanders dream about. A landing behind enemy lines, completely unopposed. The Germans were asleep, figuratively and literally. Patrols had been reduced because the Italians didn't expect anything, and the very people who had mocked the idea of a landing in this area had unknowingly helped create the perfect conditions for it. Within hours, thousands of Allied soldiers were on the beach. Tanks followed, supplies piled up. By dawn, the invasion was not only secure, it was thriving. Radios crackled through the German command structure as officers tried to understand what had just hit them. And the shock spread fast. The Allies had landed not just behind the Gustav Line, but almost within striking distance of Rome. But even before the sun fully rose, the operation's greatest flaw started revealing itself. The landing had gone perfectly, but the plan afterward was shaky. The force that came ashore was strong, but not strong enough to sprint toward Rome alone. The entire plan depended on the troops at Monte Cassino punching through the Gustav Line and linking up with the Anzio beachhead. Only then would the landing have meaning. Only then would the Germans be forced into a full retreat. But that breakthrough never came. While the Allies at Anzio were moving fast, the troops at Monte Cassino were stuck in some of the worst terrain imaginable. Steep mountains, narrow valleys, and German paratroopers who treated every stone like a fortress. The Gustav Line was holding, and the Germans knew it. And once they realized that the landing at Anzio was not a diversion, but a major threat, their panic flipped into aggression. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring ordered immediate reinforcements. The Germans moved with terrifying speed, pulling units from all over Italy. Within days, troops, tanks, and artillery were rushing toward Anzio from every direction. The early Allied advantage evaporated like mist, and the landing that started with silence soon began echoing with explosions, screams, and the grinding assault of German armor. Yet the most frustrating part for the Allied commanders was this: they could have taken Rome. Right after the landing, the road to the capital was almost completely open. German forces were scattered and disorganized. A bold push could have marched straight into the outskirts of Rome before the Germans even understood what was happening. But hesitation took over. The landing force, under General John Lucas, dug in instead of pushing forward. He believed the beachhead was too small, too vulnerable. And he wasn't willing to risk his men in a dash inland without guaranteed support. That caution gave the Germans everything they needed. In just a few days, they transformed the area around the beachhead into a deadly ring of steel. Artillery poured in. Infantry divisions formed defensive walls. Tanks positioned themselves to choke any Allied advance, and the opportunity to take Rome slipped away. What began as the most successful Allied landing since Normandy turned into a grinding stalemate, a deadly pocket where both sides fought with desperation. The Germans launched attack after attack, trying to crush the beachhead before it could grow. The Allies dug deeper and deeper, trying to survive long enough for help to arrive. Every inch of ground became soaked with blood. The fighting at Cisterna became one of the most tragic episodes of the entire campaign. U.S. Ranger units pushed forward, hoping to break the German line. But the Germans were ready. They trapped the Rangers, surrounded them, and wiped out entire companies. The survivors were captured. The rest were left on the field. The loss was devastating, and it sent shockwaves through Allied command. But the worst was the constant artillery. The Anzio beachhead was small. There was no place to hide. German guns on the surrounding high ground hammered the Allied positions day and night. Soldiers described the shelling as a nightmare that never ended. The Germans had a massive railway gun, nicknamed Anzio Annie by the troops, that could hit the beachhead from miles away. Every time the whistle of incoming shells echoed across the coastline, thousands of men braced for impact. Still, the Allies held the line. They refused to break. They refused to retreat. Every German assault was met with fierce resistance, and as the weeks dragged on, the Germans began to realize something painful. They couldn't push the Allies back into the sea. But the Allies were stuck too. Reinforcements arrived, but the breakthrough never came. The beachhead became a giant trench network, a little Western Front, as some soldiers called it. Mud, blood, exhaustion, and fear became part of daily life. And both sides wondered how long the stalemate could last. What broke the deadlock wasn't a single battle, but relentless pressure. The Allies at Monte Cassino finally cracked parts of the Gustav Line in May. Once the pressure broke there, German defenses began collapsing across the region. Kesselring realized he had to pull back or lose everything, and that retreat opened the door for the troops at Anzio to break out at last. When the push finally came, the Allies surged forward with everything they had. The long nightmare of the beachhead transformed into a wave of power and momentum. German positions fell, defensive lines crumbled, and the troops who had spent months trapped on a narrow strip of beach suddenly found themselves charging toward Rome. The city fell on June 4, 1944, 2 days before D-Day. But the controversy of Anzio never faded. Some said the landing was brilliant but mismanaged. Others said it was doomed from the start. Many pointed to the hesitation after the landing as the reason the campaign stalled. And the mocking comments from Italian generals before the operation became a bitter reminder of how confidence can quickly turn into shock once the enemy does the unexpected. The truth is simple. Anzio was a gamble that nearly failed, but it also became one of the most important stepping stones in the liberation of Italy. It exposed the German command structure, It forced them to stretch their defenses. It weakened the very lines that held back the Allies for months. And it showed that even when plans fall apart, determination can turn a disaster into a victory. The landing at Anzio wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, it wasn't easy. But it shook Italy. It rattled Germany. And it proved that sometimes the most underestimated move becomes the one that changes everything.